Çok teşekkür ederim. Merhabalar. Özür dilerim ama İngilizce konuşmam lazım. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I'm delighted to be here and to have UNDP be part of this conversation. Just listening to you this morning, I feel like it's really wonderful to be in a room where the SDGs and gender mainstreaming are not a foreign language, and that we can actually connect our work of what we do in UNDP and in the UN with the exciting work that you've been doing at imece and the Social Innovation Platform. I work for UNDP here in Istanbul, in the Istanbul Regional Hub. We are a regional office and we serve Turkey and 17 other countries and territories in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, as well as the former Soviet Union countries. And as was said this morning by one of your panelists, it's really not a question, what we see today in the world of SDGs is that it's no longer a question of geography, it's really a question of connections and similarities both within the region and outside. So what I thought I would do to start, I'm here to talk about SDGs and gender equality and how we can connect it to your work, but I thought I would just start very quickly with a short video. It's just a minute and a half on what the SDGs are and what they try to do. So here we go. So as you can see from this agenda, the SDGs, as was said by your colleagues this morning, they are a complex agenda for a complex world. The SDGs are not an answer. They're not providing any immediate solutions, but they are providing us with a roadmap of what we can do together if we come together and not look at problems as something that individual countries can tackle on their own. So really the SDGs are a declaration of interdependence, that when we come to issues of climate change or economic and financial security, we don't have the luxury anymore of just working separately in our own countries and in our own societies. So most importantly, what the SDGs have done, which their predecessor, the Millennium Development Goals, did not do, is that they have a very comprehensive agenda for gender equality, but most important, they're looking at inequalities for the first time. As you saw in the video, we have a world in which the richest 1% of people are 65 times as rich as the rest, half of the planet. So we live in a world of tremendous inequalities, and within that we continue to have very, very severe gender inequalities. So what the SDGs are saying is that there can be no development without gender equality. There is a specific gender equality goal, which is SDG 5, which looks at economic and political participation, sexual and reproductive health and rights, education of all types, as well as unpaid care work, which was very eloquently mentioned by the colleagues from 360 just a few minutes ago. what is very interesting for us as we look at the SDGs in the UN is that it gives us a connection between all the different areas of work that we do. And it's extremely important for us not to forget that there can be no development without gender equality. We have a world where 1 in 3 women are still suffering from violence. We have tremendous inequalities in education and employment. And we have a world where there's increasing acceptance of women's equality, but in practice, the progress is far too slow. So what I thought I would do is just look at a few indicators for Turkey. It was mentioned this morning also that the World Economic Forum has started to issue rankings of gender equality. It's called the Global Gender Gap Report. And this ranking for Turkey of 131 out of 144 countries is not such a bad ranking if you look at it in the aggregate. But I think what we need to do is look at it more closely. So for example, if we look at some broad development and economic indicators, Turkey is doing very well because it is a large country, it is the 17th largest economy in the world, it has a very diversified economy, and it has a lot of great, very above average levels of development when you look at the world as a whole. So when you look at the Human Development Index, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with, it measures life expectancy, access to education, health, and basic services. Again, Turkey does pretty well. It is 71 out of about 190 countries. And then when it comes to Gender Development Index, which is again a UNDP index that was developed a few years ago, it's again not a bad score at all. It's 0.9, which is close to 1, which is the highest score. And here again, it's looking at very basic issues. And since Turkey has now graduated from being a medium development country to a high development country because of the levels of GDP per capita, these scores put Turkey in the high human development category. But what is very interesting is when you put a gender lens to these figures, and you put a gender lens by looking at a relatively new index called the Gender Inequality Index. And here you see the Turkey score drops dramatically. And this is because it is measuring areas where women's rights are very important. It's measuring access to economic, access to political participation and political representation, economic participation, and access to very basic rights and ability to function as autonomous individuals in society. And here you find, as you know, women's share, you probably know this, Turkey's share of parliaments, MPs, representation in parliament is very low. It's 14%, it's 15%. It's still higher than my country. I come from India, which we are very lower still, but it's only about 15%, and the global average is about 22%, which is not great. But Turkey is still below the global average. When it comes to the labor force participation rate, again, you probably all know this, Turkey's rate at about 31 to 35% is the lowest among all OECD countries. And so these are some of the things that we need to look at more closely. And what the SDGs really help us to do is to really look at these global averages and the global figures that are coming out for economic and political development and put a gender lens to it and help us to go a little bit more deeply to see what is going on. What is very interesting in what you're doing now is that you are tackling in your new challenge, it's really exciting that you're tackling in your new round, these very issues that are actually bringing down Turkey's equality profile, gender equality profile. You're looking at issues of economic participation, at education, and at well-being, which are really the three indicators where Turkey is dropping for various reasons. These are also, just wanted to put some of these figures up to show what are some of the gaps in education. They're not dramatic, but they are still lower than what you would expect of a country of this level of high human development. A lot of the time we hear, and it's what the colleagues from 360 said, that the issue of unpaid care work is really one of the critical issues, the critical barriers that women face all over the world in accessing education and jobs. They're not able to be equal participants in the labor market or even to pursue education and other opportunities because the burden of unpaid care work, which is not just the care of children, it's the care of the elderly, the care of the sick, the long-term sick, and the people at home that you have to be responsible for, and it's also the whole body of domestic work, chores, shopping, cleaning, making food, everything, which comes under the category of unpaid care work, which now increasingly is being seen as having a great economic value and contributing to the economic growth of nations. In Turkey, you have this statistic of an average of 3.3 times more number of women perform 3.3 times more unpaid care work than men. And Turkey, along with Mexico and India, which again shows you that when it comes to these issues, there are no geographical barriers, are three countries in the world where women perform the most unpaid care work and men perform the least. So you can see that culture is no barrier when it comes to certain types of gender inequalities. So what we are trying to focus, why we are focusing on this very much in the UN these days, is not only because it's always been a big issue, but now it is a particular SDG target. Under SDG 5, which is the gender equality goal, there is a particular target which is looking to recognize, redistribute, and share the work that men and women do at home to see what are the opportunity costs for women not being in the labor force. What can we do? So one of the things I wanted to put out here, and I know it was said before, is that it's very important for us when we look at raising women's participation in economic and public life, not to forget that women's time or women's labor time is not infinite. We can't keep adding things that they can do without taking care of what is the basis, what is the basis of societal gender roles, and how are things shared between individuals in the family and between the state and society. Childcare services, elder care services are extremely weak and very, very limited, not just in Turkey, but in most countries in this region where we work. In the former Soviet Union countries, where there was an extreme reliance on very, very good state-provided services, all those have disappeared with the coming of the market and with the transition to market economies. So women are having the same problems there as we see in emerging market economies. And so just to say that when we look at creating opportunities for women to look at the underpinnings of gender roles and how can they be changed in the work that you do. I don't know how much time I have, but I wanted to just mention quickly that I was very interested to hear how certain companies are looking at gender equality in their own work, like Zorlu, for example. In UNDP, we have a new program, along with the women's empowerment principles that some of you may be familiar with, that UN Women and Global Compact do. We have a program called the Gender Equality Seal in private sector, where we actually certify companies that follow a certain methodology and reach certain levels of not just gender parity, but equal opportunity for women and men, and also in their delivery of services and in the way in which they handle their industry, they have gender equality as a core business practice. So I would be very interested in working with all of you to approach some of these companies where this work is already going on. Turkey has about 234 companies, which is the highest in our region, in the Europe and Central Asia region, the highest number of companies that are signed on to the women's empowerment principles. So that's really an opportunity opportunity and an entry point for us to look at. And we are also very interested as UNDP in the regional center here to bring some sharing and learning. We have some work going on in social impact bonds in other countries in the region, which we would love to be part of whatever work you do. And we would like to know much more about how you are developing your social innovation platform, because we really believe that this would be extremely helpful to a lot of smaller countries, especially in the Balkans, that are looking at this more closely. So to conclude, I just want to say, invest in women and invest for women, and please make sure that gender equality is not just a side activity that you do in image, but that it really becomes part of your normal work. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.